Greetings and thank you for joining us. Thank you to those online as well. We also have some guests online. My name is Fida Adeli, and I'm the director for the Center of Contemporary Arab Studies here at Georgetown University, as well as the Clovis and Hala Salam Maksud Chair in Arab Studies. We're gathered here today to celebrate, remember, and build on the legacy of Dr. Halim Barakat. I'm honored to say a few words about the immeasurable impact Dr. Barakat had on the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies throughout his 27-year career here. Dr. Barakat taught at the American University of Beirut, Harvard, and the University of Texas in Austin before he came to the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies in 1976. The center had just been founded a year earlier, and Dr. Barakat became instrumental in shaping the identity, activities, and curriculum of the center during its formative years. Former students of Dr. Barakat remembered him for his strength as an educator and a caring mentor. One student remarked, quote, "His gentle soul, humility, approachability, and talent for creating a supportive learning environment made him a beloved mentor to those privileged to be his students," end quote. Another student said, "From the time I landed and periodically returned, Halim was always there to welcome me, graciously. His academic stature never got the best of his humanity. Being at the Barakat house was like being at a home away from home." Professor Emerita Judith Tucker, his colleague at the center for 2 decades, said of Dr. Barakat, "During his 27 years at Georgetown, Halim was a mainstay of the center, one of a generation of stellar Arab intellectuals who shaped the mission of the center, formulating its unique academic programs focused on the Arab world, establishing its reputation as the go-to place for the study of the modern Arab region, and perhaps most importantly of all," Tucker says, "imbuing it with a sense of purpose, a deep-seated and unabashed recognition of the role that the aspirations of the people of the region could and should play in our program of study and research." Halim was a strong supporter of the Palestinian people's aspirations and their inalienable rights to self-determination, freedom, and dignity. This morning, we woke to the news of Palestinians once again resisting their ongoing oppression. The endless blockade, illegal blockade of Gaza, that has brought ongoing misery and oppression, the expansion of settlements and settler violence that continues to actively expel Palestinians from their homes, and a system of apartheid that is every day further entrenched. Remembering Halim today is sobering and fitting. Sobering because the struggle he championed for so long continues to weigh on us. Fitting because of the example he provided for remaining committed to justice for Palestinians and for others. While I did not have the honor of working with Dr. Barakat, I and others in this room today are direct beneficiaries of his legacy at the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies. With this legacy comes also responsibility to carry on the commitments that Halim helped make so central to our work then and now, and we are honored to continue this legacy. I will be emceeing our program today. We have a lineup of close friends, colleagues, and family to say a few words about the lasting impression he had on our community. And I will do an introduction in turn for each speaker. Our first 2 speakers will be joining us remotely, and they are in the same place. So we'll be joined by Adonis and Munir Bashur. I'll give a brief introduction to each of them, and then we'll bring them up on the screen for all of us to hear their words. Adonis is one of the greatest poets of all time and a lifelong friend of Halim. He was born in the same region in Syria, and Halim and Adonis were part of the same intellectual circle in the 1950s around the Sha'ar Journal. Munir Bashur is a professor emeritus from the American University of Beirut. He was born in 1933 in Safita, Syria. He received his undergraduate and Master of Arts degree from the American University of Beirut before pursuing a PhD in comparative education at the University of Chicago. He has had a long career at the American University of Beirut, teaching from 1964 to 2021, and he was named Professor Emeritus in 2022. He is the author of many books, including The Structure of the Educational System in Lebanon and Higher Education in the Arab States. In addition to over 40 articles in English and Arabic, he also is a lifelong friend of Halim. So at this point, I will turn the floor over to Adonis.
الصديقات والأصدقاء الحضور، أتذكر وأتخيل كيف كانت أمواج المتوسط تسهر وتنام وتستيقظ على شواطئ بيروت مع الأشرعة الثقافية التي كان ينسجها الخلاقون كل برؤيته ورؤياه في مناخ فريد من الصداقة والإبداع، وفي طليعتهم حليم بركات، وكيف كانوا يطلقونها في فضاء العرب. كانوا فيما يمارسون إبداعهم يؤكدون أن غياب الحرية ليس غيابا للثقافة وحدها، وإنما هو كذلك غياب لبيروت نفسها وللإنسان نفسه. وها هم وقد غاب معظمهم يعيدون التأكيد بهذا الغياب نفسه، أن من يجهل الكتابة الخلاقة المتنوعة التي احتضنتها بيروت في النصف الثاني من القرن العشرين المنصرم، وتحديدا بين 1950 و 1980، لا يعرف الثقافة العربية الحديثة المعرفة الحقة. في هذا الرماد الذي يملأ سماء لبنان اليوم تتلألأ بيروت في ذاكرة التاريخ، ويتلألأ في هذه الذاكرة أحد صانعيها حليم بركات.
أنا يسعدني جدا أن أكون المتحدث الثاني بعد أدونيس، وذلك بشكل خاص لأن العلاقة الروحية بين حليم من جهة وأدونيس من جهة ثانية وأنا من جهة ثالثة كانت علاقة عميقة ذات أبعاد روحية وفلسفية متجذرة. علاقتي بحليم أولاً بالأول كانت في مطلع الخمسينات من القرن الماضي، وذلك زمن طويل مضى، وكان بيننا نوع من الصداقة وفي الوقت نفسه نوع من المخاصمة أو التطابق. هو كان يكتب القصص القصيرة، وكنت أنا أحاول أن أجاريه أو أسبقه، وننشر في مجلة كان اسمها الأجيال، وكانت هذه المجلة تصدر بالشهر مرة، والقراء في الجامعة الطلاب والأساتذة يحاولون أن يمتدحوا حليم أحيانا أنه كاتب أفضل وقصته أحلى، وآخرون يعكسون الآية ويفضلون. وهكذا نشأنا من الأول على صداقة متوترة بالمعنى الروحي والفكري، وكبرت هذه الصداقة جدا، باعتبار أن حليم مع الوقت أصبح ليس فقط زميلا وإنما رفيقا روحيا ذا بعد أخلاقي وفلسفي عميق. ونشأنا معا إلى أن أقدمت الجامعة الأمريكية على إنهاء العقد مع حليم، وكان ذلك في شكل من الأشكال من حسن حظه، لأنه ترك بيروت وسافر وعاد إلى الولايات المتحدة، فقضى السنة الأولى في جامعة ميشيغان على ما أتصور، ومنها انتقل إلى إلى واشنطن، إلى جونز هوبكنز، جورج تاون. وهناك أسس اتجاها جديدا في الفكر والبحوث العربية التي تأخذ بعين الاعتبار ليس فقط معلومات تاريخية وإنما فهما عميقا للنفس العربية باعتباره كان اختصاصيا في هذا المجال. حليم كتب أشياء كثيرة وقرأت معظم ما كتبه، وفي الفترة الأخيرة أعدت قراءة بعض الكتب التي كتبها، وأعرف أن كتابا مثل عودة الطائر إلى البحر وروايات مثل هذه مشهورة بين القراء كثيرا، ولكنني شخصيا معجب برواية عنوانها إنانا والنهر، وهي بالنسبة لمعرفتي بالأدب والروايات من أعمق ما كتب في اللغة العربية، وأعتقد أن قيمتها لم تعرف حتى الآن من قبل النقاد بسبب عدم الانتشار أو أسباب أخرى كثيرة. إنها من أروع الروايات، وفيها يبدو حليم ليس فقط راويا أو قاصا وإنما أيضا شاعر. وفي هذه الرواية صفحات متعددة من الشعر تصورت في أول الأمر أنها مقتبسة، ولكن تحققت أخيرا أنها من إبداعه هو، وأشياء جميلة جدا. وأود بهذه المناسبة أن أدعو كل من يقرأ العربية لقراءة هذه الرواية الرائعة. حليم وأنا وأدونيس أتصور أن هناك علاقة روحية عميقة جدا، حتى لو غيب الزمن أحدنا وفصل المسافات الجغرافية بيننا، لكن العلاقة الروحية التي قامت بيننا كانت ثابتة وعميقة وصادقة. ويسعدني جدا أن أشارك الجميع في هذه الأفكار حول صديق العزيز حليم، الذي أعتبره بالرغم من غيابه بسبب الموت أنه موجود بيننا باستمرار. هو كان غائبا عن بيروت باعتبار مكان سكنه في واشنطن وأنا في بيروت، ولكنه لم يفارق أفكاري وذكرياتي وأحلامي في يوم من الأيام. وما يؤسفني جدا أنني لم أتمكن في سنواته الأخيرة أن أكون إلى جانبه وأن أحاول أن أساعده في أيامه الأخيرة. حليم بركات من الناس الذين يتركون طابعا فكريا والأهم طابعا أخلاقيا على كل الذين يتعاملون معه، إن كان في مجال التدريس أو في مجال الكتابة والتأليف. وأنا أفتخر بأنني كنت أحد زملائه وأصدقائه.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker, who can't be with us, so his words are going to be read by Bassam Haddad, is Sinan Antoun. Sinan is a poet, novelist, scholar, and translator. He was born in Baghdad in 1967. He left Iraq after the 1991 Gulf War. He holds degrees from Baghdad, Georgetown, and Harvard. He's a graduate of the Arab Studies program as well. At Harvard, he earned his doctorate in Arabic literature. His essays have appeared in The Guardian, Washington Post, The Nation, and the New York Times, and many pan-Arab newspapers and journals. His most recent work is the book of Collateral Damage. He is the Associate Professor of Arabic Literature at New York University. Bassam?
Thank you, Fida, and everyone for being here. This might come as a shock for people who are watching because the language is going to switch to Arabic. So we don't have translation, I assume. كنتوا تدبروا حالكم. عن حليم بركات، عودة الطائر، كلمات سنان أنطون. أول مرة قابلت فيها حليم بركات كانت قبل 3 عقود. اصطحبني صديقي الأعز بسام حداد أنا يومها إلى قاعة في إحدى بنايات جامعة جورج تاون، حيث كان الطلبة بانتظار قدوم الأستاذ. أخبره بسام أنني من العراق وأنني كنت أنوي دراسة الماجستير في مركز الدراسات العربية في الفصل التالي، واستأذنه أن أحضر ضيفا مستمعا. وافق حليم وارتسمت ابتسامته الحنونة الطفولية التي تعرفونها جيدا مرحبا وقال: إيه أهلا وسهلا. كنت قد قرأت قبل هجرتي من العراق عام 1991 روايتيه الرائعتين 6 أيام وطائر الحوم، ومقالات تحليلية في مجلة مواقف عن الاغتراب والدين والسلطة والمجتمع العربي. أعتبر نفسي محظوظا للغاية لأنني كنت من تلاميذه. كان حليم بركات بالنسبة لكاتب عربي شاب مثلي آنذاك مثلا يحتذى وقدوة في جمعه بين الإبداع الأدبي وبين البحث الأكاديمي وتميزه فيهما، وأن يكون مثقفا لا يهادن في نقده للسلطة والأنظمة في المجتمعات العربية، كما لا يهادن في وقوفه ضد الاستعمار الجديد وهو في عقر داره، وفي ثباته والتزامه المبدئي أمام تقلبات الرياح الأيديولوجية والهزائم والانكسارات التي عصفت بكثير من المثقفين وجرفتهم هي والمغريات التي أغوت من انتقلوا من اليسار إلى اليمين. كان حليم حليما حقا. لم أرى في كل سنين الدراسة أستاذا أكثر منه تواضعا وتفهما وصبرا مع الطلبة. لم يكن نقد الأبوية والسلطة لديه نظريا فحسب، بل ارتبط وتمثل بالممارسة والتطبيق، فكانت صفوفه مساحات حرية مفتوحة للحوار النقدي والجدال، وكان يتقبل النقد ويرحب به بابتسامة ويجيد الإصغاء للجميع، وكان يشجعنا على المغامرة والخروج على الأطر الضيقة والمقاربات التقليدية. شجعني على إكمال دراسة الدكتوراه ودعمني وألهمني وسأبقى مدينا له. سأختم بكلمات، هي كلمات سنان كلها. Just in case somebody is coming, this is Sinan Antoun speaking. سأختم بكلمات حليم من رواية طائر الحوم. أحب شجرة الصفصاف لأنها تنكفئ على ذاتها وجذورها. كلما كبرت في العمر انحنت أغصاني نحو جذوري. ظلت أغصانه مخلصة لجذوره. سلام على روحه المحلقة، وشكرا من القلب لما تركه من إثر لنا وفينا. شكرا سنان.
We'll give Bassam a proper introduction when he comes back up. But thank you, Bassam, for reading Sinan's words on his behalf. So our next speaker is Edmund Gharib, a board member at the Jerusalem Fund. Edmund Gharib is an internationally recognized expert on Iraq, the Middle East, the Kurds, the Arab and American media, the Mahjar Press, and US Arab relations. He taught at Georgetown University in Washington and in Qatar, George Washington University, the University of Virginia, and McGill University, and is a senior scholar at the Jerusalem Fund. He is the author and co-author of several widely acclaimed books, including The Kurdish Nationalist Movement, War in the Gulf, and Enemy of the Sun, a Palestinian poetry anthology, among others. He is also the author of numerous articles, encyclopedia entries, book chapters, and reviews. And he is a contributing commentator for AP and the BBC, and is widely interviewed by media outlets in the US, Europe, the Arab world, and Asia. Thank you, Edmund. Welcome.
Thank you, Fidel. And thank you for organizing this event. I think it's a very, very important one to remember. A great scholar, a great teacher, Halim Barakat. Halim was a unique individual. He was a friend, a neighbor. He actually became more than a neighbor. He became family. He and his late wife, Hayat, who was an amazing lady. And we will always remember him. Hayat actually was the godmother for my son, Faris. And so we've had a relationship that goes back a long time. We're gathered here today as both colleagues, friends, former students of Halim Barakat to pay tribute to his life, his legacy. And what's important about it, that Halim was as he was described earlier, as someone who was very humble, very friendly, very helpful. He was humorous. He always was a good joke teller. And he was always open to other people, to meet other people and learn about them. He was also someone who used his intellect to not only to analyze Arab society and to educate students, but to speak up against injustice, to defend the oppressed. He was a very strong friend of the Palestinian people, a defender of the Palestinian people. He was asked by the late Hisham Sharabi, as I was, to become members of the executive committee of the Jerusalem Fund. And Halim was always coming up with great ideas. He himself participated in several of the lectures, but he suggested people to speakers, possible speakers for the center, topics of discussion. He pushed for the idea that we should have more cultural events also that and talk about not the Palestinian people and their struggle. But he, at the same time, while he was a defender of and supporter of oppressed peoples or people who have suffered wars, he, at the same time, whether it's people in Iraq, whether it's in Yemen and Libya and any place in the region, at the same time, he also cared for people of other ethnicities in other parts of the world. There is a saying, an Arabic saying, which goes something like this: من ينهل العلم فهو أفضل الناس وما أفضل منه إلا من ينشره. The best of men, he who acquires knowledge, but better than him is the one who transmits it. I remember another saying in Arabic, and I used this when the Jerusalem Fund honored Halim, and he was there. Basically, I said that to him, and as part of the few words I made at that time, that there is a saying which says, behind every great man, there's a great woman. And I said, when I think of Halim, I think of his loving and lovely wife, Hayat. And I changed it to say that next to every great man, there is a great woman. And afterwards, Halim came up to me and he said, you are conspiring, you the Aita people. Aita is the hometown of Hayat and myself. And he said, you're ganging up on me. You're ganging up on the people of Kafrun. So but he said it, so I mean, it was such fun, such joy to hear him say that. Actually, that's where I first met Halim. I first met Halim was in the village of Aita, our village. My second cousins, Faris and Isaf Gharib, were studying at the American University of Beirut, and they invited Halim, and as they invited some other friends to come on the weekends or in the summer to visit them in Aita. And what they did usually, they would go in the mornings, they would go to visit different parts of the village in the mountain. But at night, they would get together, they would have play games, they would dance the dabki, they would sing. And we, as I was a young teen at that time, I went with some other friends to watch them. One day, Halim, they were dancing the dabki, and he saw me watching them. And so he came up to me and pulled me by the hand. He said, "Come and join us." I said, "I don't know how to dance the dabki." And he said, "You mean there are people in Aita?" I thought all the people of Aita, which is the name of our town, know how to do the dabki. He said, "We have to bring you some people from Kafrun to teach you how to dance." But what I noticed, something that was very interesting at that time also, that Halim was, after seeing him a few times, I noticed that he always seemed to go close to Hayat. Wherever Hayat was sitting, he would sit next to her, or he would dance. When they danced the dabki, they would dance together. So then my cousin Faris told me that actually one time when they were visiting, they passed by Hayat's house, and Hayat was on the roof. And Halim said to him, "I didn't know you have such beautiful women in Aita." So Faris told him, he said, "All the women in Aita are beautiful. One is more beautiful than the other." From that moment, it seems that Halim was smitten. So from that time, I think that he fell in love with Hayat, and later they would get married after her family moved to Michigan, and he himself went and studied at the University of Michigan. The next time I saw Halim, actually, I came to the United States. He was in Beirut when I went back I was a reporter for the New York Times. No, certainly not for the Daily Star and Al Hayat newspapers. And I also worked as the assistant editor of the Journal of Palestine Studies. And that's when I met Halim, because Halim was also close to Hisham Sharabi, and we'd often meet at their apartments at that time and talk politics till late 2-3 o'clock in the morning. And I remember interviewing Halim did 2 interviews with him at the time when there were protests supporting the Palestinian cause, which didn't go well with the powers that be at the university at that time. Later, of course, as we've heard, Halim came to the United States. He was invited to teach at Harvard and other places, and he ended up here at the CCAS. And that's when really our relationship began, because they moved very close to us. Their house was the next street to us, and we would often meet and get together during evenings, weekends. I mean, they were really family to us, Halim and Hayat. And often Tony, also Halim's brother, would come. We would play backgammon. And that's something to see, when especially the arguments begin to take place about when one is winning. But let me just say a few words about Halim, as I reviewed 2 of his books. I reviewed his book about Arab society. I reviewed also his book about the Iraq War. Halim, in many ways, he's an intellectual treasure in his areas of expertise. His work is impeccable in its integrity and wide-ranging in its scope. Halim's novels also, the first novel I read was Sittat Ayyam, which was, as I'm sure others will talk about it, and there was reference to it, is that he talked about the attack on a village, a small town by the Israelis. And it was sort of, in a way, prophetic, because a few years later, in 1967, there was the 6 Days War. And so basically it speaks about what occurred almost at that time. But one of the things about Halim is that he focuses attention on causes in his book on Arab society, which is taught, by the way, all over the region and in the United States. He talked about the crises in Arab society, and basically he offered a perceptive analysis of the alienation which is chaining Arabs. Also he attributed a lot of what's happening, the problems that are happening to the loss, the collapse of what the Arab dream, which is what saddened them a great deal, especially in what's been going on in recent years, whether it was Kuwait, whether it was Iraq, whether it's Syria, Lebanon, Libya, and many other areas. He always believed that we should try to have a better life in many ways, better way of life for the Arab people, and bring greater democratization. He, in fact, organized a conference in the 80s where he invited Arab intellectuals from all over the region. And there was, of course, Fatima Mernissi, who emphasized the need for democracy and liberation. And he always was bringing up these new ideas and the need to bring intellectuals together. He also, at that conference, Ben-Noon was also attended there, as well as a number of North African professors at that time. But in any case, Halim, I think, was always, I noticed because we attended several conferences together. We went, for example, to Tunis, to Morocco, to Lebanon, and to in the United States and a number of other places. But everywhere he went, he seemed to have friends, former students who adored him, people who loved spending time with him. He was very close. He introduced me to the great poet Adonis at his house, and he also introduced me to several people. Nawal Saadawi, for example, again, was another important person who I was very much impressed with, and many others. Halim basically was over the decades, as people knew him, he was a very charming individual. He was humorous. He was a raconteur and teller of jokes, a great friend, a good nationalist, and a principled anti-sectarian person. I always will remember his clever humor and his infectious laugh. Halim and Hayat will be sorely missed. And in conclusion, let me quote classicist poet Horace. Horace wrote, and he said, "I have finished a monument more lasting than bronze and loftier than the pyramids, one that no wasting rain, no furious north wind can destroy. I shall not altogether die, but a mighty part of me shall escape the death goddess. On and on shall I grow." And for Halim, indeed, like Horace, has built his monument that shall outlast bronze and stone. It's his academic books and his novels. And thank you all for being here. One last word. I was asked by Dr. Subhi Ali of the Jerusalem Fund. We both worked together. Halim and I would often drive together, as we did when I was teaching at Georgetown. He would would come down together a number of times to express his condolences to the family. And I'm sure Jihad's going to be speaking later, the executive director, and to say that he always believed that Halim was one of the mainstays, the pillars of the Jerusalem Fund. And he did great work for the Palestinian people and for the Jerusalem Fund. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Edmund. Our next speaker is Rochelle Davis, the Sultanate of Oman Associate Professor of Anthropology at the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies at Georgetown University, my colleague. Her research focuses on refugees, war and conflict, particularly in Palestine, Syria, and Iraq. She's currently writing a book on the role of culture in the US military occupation of Iraq. She was a senior researcher on a joint Georgetown University and international Organization for Migration project conducting mixed methods panel survey over 5 years of more than 3,000 Iraqi households displaced by Daesh to understand displaced people's access to durable solutions. Welcome, Rochelle.
Hello, everyone, and it's a real honor to be here. I joined CCAS in 2005, which was 3 years after Dr. Barakat retired. And so we didn't actually overlap, but because we are a family at CCAS, he was constantly there, and we were always interacting with each other. And I have very fond memories of a wonderful event in 2006 for the DC launch of his book, Al-Madina Al-Mulawwana, which was published by Dar Saqi. But I knew Dr. Barakat's work long before I came to CCAS, because when I was a PhD student at the University of Michigan, like Dr. Barakat, I read his work closely, and like others, I am forever grateful for his sort of huge output. So what I'd like to do is read from some of his work as a way to celebrate and honor him. So the first, I'm going to read two excerpts. One is from his novel Sittat Ayyam, 6 Days, which in a prescient move he published in 1961, and it was translated in 1990 into English by Bassam Frangia and Scott McGehee. And the translators themselves say that 6 Days combines his sensitivity as a social psychologist with his mastery as a novelist. And I'm going to read the scene where Sohail, who's the main protagonist, has been detained. Dr. Barakat's insights into human character and the strength of Palestinian resistance and the will to live and to live with dignity are illustrated in this short excerpt. So it starts. The officer jumps to his feet and begins to pace nervously around Sohail. He looks at Sohail's torn clothes, his messy hair, and the dried blood from the cut on his forehead. The blood is mixed with dirt. The officer comes up to him and quietly puts his hand on his shoulder, pointing to a chair in front of the desk. Please sit. He sits, surprised at the change in the officer's manner. Perhaps he wants to get the information in a gentle way. He won't tell him no matter what he tries. The officer continues to smile as he sits on the couch again and says, Mr. Sohail, you seem to be an educated man. We want to do everything we can to treat you well. That depends on how much you help us, but we respect your culture. He says, we have a mission that involves your country. Sohail says, mission? What mission? That's not the issue right now. The officer stops talking, feeling that he is being distracted from his purpose. A moment passes. He gathers his thoughts and says, I'm asking you not to force us to resort to violence. This is an aside by me. This is very prescient again of Halim and in the conversation that Fida raised about sort of our moment today. Okay, back to the book. We have a number of tortures we can use. We can't leave you until we know the truth. We will use any tool that is necessary. I am appealing to your good sense. I want to tell you that there are some here who enjoy torturing people. Do you have a hobby? I don't know. The hobby of these people is torture. The most wonderful thing to them is to see a human being bent in suffering. We have many such people. I hope you do not get to know them. He repeats his last words with anger and then asks calmly, what do you say? May I ask a simple question? Of course, please ask. Are you one of those people? The officer's smile disappears. Anger leaps to his handsome face as he rises suddenly from his seat. He stamps his foot on the floor, shouting, shut up, take him to his cell. You can wait for them there. So I wanted to read that excerpt because I thought it really sort of, he does such an amazing job of kind of looking at the sort of psychological tension and sort of what what was going on in this particular in this particular book and the 6 days. I also have it signed by Halim, so it's a very treasured possession of mine. And I want to conclude with a short passage from Dr. Barakat's book, The Crane, that Sinan Anton mentioned, which was published in Arabic in 1988, and it was translated into English in 2008 by Bassam Frangia and this time with Roger Allen. The book was described by Tasnim Qutayt as, quote, a short autobiographical prose work, its tone fluctuating between realism and an interior monologue, poetic passages, and political rhetoric. So in that book, Dr. Barakat writes about himself words that describe his life and experiences of exile and home and his commitment to struggle for what he believed in and for justice. So this is I cobbled these pieces together from different parts of the book. Quote, he says, like you, O crane, I've crossed continents, flown over mountains, and followed rivers and seas. I've exposed myself to death, and on each occasion have been reborn. I've plunged through clouds translucent and dense, and touched the naked sky. I have stood in the rain, battled tempests, and discovered new horizons. I've left my flock and then rejoined it. I've ranged in all 4 directions and taken root in the earth, and I've come to know profound sorrow and happiness. Since leaving Kafrun as a child, I've plunged into the world and joined its battles on all fronts. Without something to fight for, I'm like a fish out of water. In battle, I'm like the salmon Hani told me about. They swim up rivers and streams against the current till they reach the place where they were born. Once they arrive after their arduous struggle, they lay their eggs and die. End quote. But he doesn't end the book this way. Instead, he tells of returning from a trip into the mountains with his beloved Hayat, and he says, quote, we free ourselves of melancholy and sing the ode to joy, end quote. So thank you, Ustazna, for your beautiful words, your insightful vision, and your commitment to struggle and justice that inspires us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Rochelle. So our next speaker is Bassam Haddad. Bassam is the founding director of the Middle East and Islamic Studies program and associate professor at the Schar School of Policy and Government at George Mason University. Bassam is also the co-founder and editor of the Jadaliya e-zine and the executive director of the Arab Studies Institute. He serves as the founding editor of the Arab Studies Journal and the Knowledge Production Project. He's a co-producer, director of the award-winning documentary film about Baghdad and director of the acclaimed series Arabs and Terrorism. Bassam is executive producer of the Status podcast channel and the director of the Middle East Studies Pedagogy Initiative. Welcome, Bassam.
Thanks again, Fida. I see a lot of familiar faces, so this is a good occasion. Halim, the Gentle Soul. My first class at the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies was with Professor Barakat. We would walk into class and find him there smiling and often having arrived ahead of most students. Halim was respectful, unassuming, always gentle, and always thoughtful in the classroom and beyond. He's a unique personality who touched so many of us in ways that have never wore off. In his own way, he compelled us to think and unthink, learn and unlearn, and with his poetic social science, he contributed immensely to the intellectual as well as political development of his students. More than that, he showed a very rare combination of courage and sensitivity in addressing controversial topics, not least on the question of Palestine. Less than a year after I joined as an MA student at the Arab Studies program, I had met Sinan, whose words I shared a little while ago, who was interested in the Arab Studies Journal we had just launched that year, a journal that Halim Barakat supported immensely and helped us move forward in significant ways along with Professor Judith Tucker at the time. Sinan wanted to learn more about the program as he had applied to the Arabic department. I wanted him to switch and join CCAS, convinced him to attend one class that I was taking with Halim Barakat, and he obliged. I introduced him to Professor Barakat, and we both made an impression on him, both as in me and Professor Halim, on him that he should come to Arab studies instead. He did, and the rest is history. Halim would have a lasting impact on Sinan as well, as you have heard. I knew Halim in the classroom where I took several of his courses in the first part of the 1990s. And sometimes Sinan and I would just audit his courses, just as we did with Professor Batato's courses. People thought we were weird because we would audit the same classes we took. But also knew him outside the classroom, as him and Hayat were hospitable at their home as well. Mainly, I also spent time with him at our own home, where we would host Halim and Hayat, as well as other professors at CCAS throughout the 1990s and beyond. My mother was fond of his work and read his novels with interest and passion. He was also fond of her, of Asma, and her personality, as well as her unique hospitality, which he appreciated and talked about to others. And we had long conversations with Halim about many, many personal things that I will spare you. Another space in which both Sinan and I witnessed Halim be himself, and he was always himself, was at the home of Hisham Sharabi, who would occasionally invite Sinan and I and our significant others, we're still not sure why, to dinners in which Halim was always a fixture. And we also had the honor to meet Adonis during these dinners and many other luminaries at the time. For Sinan and I, it was always a surreal experience, surrounded by those we read and admired. Unfortunately, Batato would not join usually, so we actually had to visit him at his home way out in Virginia, and Halim was going to come with us one time, but it didn't happen. The evenings at Sharabi's were beyond memorable, and the conversations beautifully historic, nothing short of a socio-intellectual Disneyland for Sinan and I. There, we would indulge in lengthy conversations with Halim, who treated us as though we were friends. He was sometimes quite silent and in the background, and sometimes he would just take over and people would be standing around him, smiling, laughing at his prose, at his jokes, and at his wonderful personality and the things that he shared. He would talk about everything, including sharing racy jokes with us and receiving them as well, always in appropriate taste. He was such a worldly human being who made us feel at ease, thereby empowering us beyond what we knew back then. I would like to close with a remark that has always made me emotional, hence its placement at the end. And I am going to skip a number of things because I know that everybody has been here for quite some time. It was actually Halim Barakat who selected my application from the pile at CCAS, and as I was told much later on, he said in the meeting, after summarizing my statement of purpose, I want Bassam Haddad to join the program, and so on. He never told me of this, others did, and told me other things which I also will not share. Good things. So I owe Halim a lot, we all do, and we are better for having known him and being influenced by him. Loyal until the end, Halim is the quintessential gentle soul. Thank you.
Thank you, Bassam. So our next speaker is Bishara Dumani, the Mahmoud Darwish Chair for Palestinian Studies at Brown University and the nephew of Dr. Halim Barakat. His research focuses on the social histories of peoples, places, and time periods, marginalized by mainstream scholarship on the early modern and modern Middle East. Dumani is the former president of Birzeit University in Palestine, the founding director of the Brown University's Center for Middle East Studies, and of the New Directions in Palestinian Studies Research Initiative. From 2008 to 2011, he led a team that produced a strategic plan for the establishment of the Palestinian Museum. Welcome, Shara.
Thank you for that. Thank you all for coming here. I want to begin by thanking Coco Tate, who was the point person for the organization of this event. I want to thank the others that worked with her, and the Georgetown University, of course, and the Jerusalem Fund. I shared quite inspirational and painful moments about my relationship with Halim Barakat in the eulogy that I gave for him. So I will just focus now just on his public-facing part of Halim. Needless to say, he was my oldest and best friend all my life. I owe him everything. Halim Barakat will be remembered as an eminent novelist and a short story writer, a prolific scholar on topics ranging from quantitative sociological studies to literary criticism, and a public intellectual dedicated to social justice, freedom, and equality in the Arab world, especially in his beloved Syria, Lebanon, and Palestine. His novels boldly engaged the most intimate and existential issues of his generation and deftly connected them to the major political intellectual debates of his time. For me, he wrote, scholarship is inseparable from genuine concern over issues of social and political transformation. Born in Kafroun, a mixed Christian and Alawite village in Syria's Jabal al-Nasara, Halim was no stranger to displacement or to the Palestinian cause. His father, Isbir, died at a young age, leaving behind Barakat's mother, Maryam Halim Barakat, and 3 children, young children. Maryam trekked to Beirut to work as a live-in housemaid, no children around allowed, so she was forced to put her children in orphanages. This chain of traumatic events on the eve of World War II proved to be a deeply generative force in Barakat's literary writing. His mode of writing was characterized from the very beginning by searingly honest, but also lyrical, semi-autobiographical explorations of foundational questions, doubts, and desires, laced with social realism, allegory, and humanistic symbolism. Halim Barakat started writing in earnest in the early 1950s while a student at Brumana High School in Mount Lebanon, and at AUB, where he finished his bachelor degree in 1955 and his master's in 1960 after working as a teacher for a few years. His appearance on literary stage, so to speak, coincided with the rising revolutionary youth movements in the Arab world, as well as with the emergence of what is arguably the golden age of Arab intellectuals, writers, and artists. Halim contributed to both. His first novel tackled youth, love, and activism in a troubled post-colonial Lebanon. Al-Qimam al-Khadra, or Green Summits, published in 1956, cemented his place within a circle of modernist, avant-garde poets and literary critics such as Adonis and Yusuf al-Khal, who would go on to publish and establish and publish the iconic Shi'r poetry journal in Beirut in 1957. Shi'r published Halim's well-received book of short stories, Al-Samt wal-Matar, Silence and Rain, in 1958, which included a powerful introduction by Jabra Ibrahim Jabra. The Palestinians became central to Halim in these years and for the rest of his life. Active in the Syrian Social Nationalist Party, he also admired the Arab nationalist movement and rubbed shoulders with the likes of George Habash and Ghassan Kanafani. Uncannily prophetic, his novel Sittat Ayyam, 6 Days, published by Shi'r in 1961, while Halim was completing his PhD at the University of Michigan, narrated the story of resistance to an Israeli military invasion that lasted 6 days, culminating in the destruction of a Palestinian city. And 6 years later, after 6 days, the Six-Day War took place. By the time he earned his doctorate in social psychology in 1966, he was thoroughly inspired by the civil rights, anti-war, feminist, and indigenous justice movements that course through US college and university campuses. Halim doubled down on campus activism when he joined the faculty of AUB in 1966. It's not surprising that immediately following the Six-Day War, he traveled to the Zizia, known today as Al Jizya, refugee camp in Jordan, with a colleague, the late professor of sociology, Peter Dodd, and 10 AUB students. There, they were joined by an equal number of local students who helped conduct dozens of in-depth interviews with Palestinian refugees to complete an ambitious 50-question survey focused on 3 issues. What caused them to leave Palestine? What were their experiences of leaving? And what did they think about the possibility of returning? This valuable and pioneering study remains, to my knowledge, the only one of its kind. It opened a space for the voices of Palestinian refugees only days after they were forced to abandon their homes. And a few months later, in 1968, the Institute for Palestine Studies published Halim Barakat's first academic book, اقتلاع ونفي دراسة اجتماعية علمية, Uprooting and Expulsion, a Social Scientific Study, co-authored with Peter Dodd. An English version was also published in 1969 by IPS under the title River Without Bridges, a study of the exodus of the 1967 Arab refugees. It's also not surprising that simultaneously Halim wrote his novel عودة الطائر إلى البحر, released in 1969 and published in English as Days of Dust, with a foreword by Edward Said, about the existentially personal and politically radicalizing impact of the 1967 Naksa, or defeat. He followed this with sociological surveys on student activism at AUB, later published a 1977 book in Lebanon in Strife, Student Preludes to the Civil War. In the preface, Halim openly stated that his perspective in the book, quote, must be traced to my identification with the uprooted, the destitute, deprived, and humbled. This radical stance came at a cost. However, the AUB administration fired Barakat in 1972 and refused to back down despite large student protests that ensued. Ironically, Halim's forced departure and his subsequent residency in the United States, which he relentlessly experienced as one of exile, decade after decade, led to the most productive period of his life. Numerous novels and academic studies followed, as well as regular essays in newspapers and magazines. He wrote academic books on visions of social reality in the Arab novel, on identity and the crisis of modernity, on alienation in Arab culture, on Arab writers in exile, on the First Gulf War, among other things. His most influential was his 1984 book, Al-Mujtama al-Arabi al-Mu'asir, Contemporary Arab Society. Its wide-ranging thematic structure, multidisciplinary approaches, and temporal scope spanning a century made it an instant classic. This book went through many editions, at least seven major editions, and expansions over the next 25 years. It's taught in just about every Arab university in the Arab world. And one of the iterations, published in 2000, was a tome of over 1,000 pages. And another, an English version, The Arab World, Society, Culture, and State, published in 1993 by the University of California Press, became an academic bestseller. Of the several novels he wrote since his move to the United States in 1974, culminating in his last and longest novel, Al-Madina al-Mulawwana, The City of Colors, about Beirut in the early 50s, and that was published in 2006. The one that had the most impact is his shortest novel, tirelessly, The Crane, released in Morocco in 1988. And as noted in an introduction by Abdurrahman Munif, one of Halim's close friends and an amazing novelist himself, Barakat's lyrical and intensely personal mediation on death focused largely on his mother and father. And this encapsulated his strength as a writer, the courage to face oneself day after day, share that journey with the reader, and connect it to the larger social and humanistic contexts. It took Halim almost half a century to process the death of his father and the events that followed thereafter. Indeed, he started Tar al-Hawm as a short story in 1961, then resumed and expanded it from 1985 to 1988 after two very inspiring visits to Kafrun, following a very long absence. His elation and sense of freedom when the book was completed, a kind of a cathartic psychological release for himself, is obvious from his one-line epigram and an otherwise empty and unnumbered opening page of the book. The epigram read as follows: تفرج يا حبيبي وشوف حليم بركات على المكشوف. Come, my darling, and take a look. Halim Barakat is an open book. Halim and his cohort of writers who came of age in the post-World War II decolonization period experienced intense moments of hope and similarly intense moments of despair over the subsequent decades. These moments included the rise of pan-Arab nationalism and the Palestinian resistance movement on one end of the spectrum, and the Naksa and the triumph of authoritarian Arab regimes on the other. Throughout, Halim and his contemporaries gazed unflinchingly into the internal problems of Arab societies and analyzed them with sharp minds. Yet they never despaired nor lost the will to find ways to change them, to become more just, equal, and independent from colonial powers, and for some to also become unified, not as regimes, but as peoples who recognized and celebrated their diversity as well as the ties that bind. What set Halim apart from this group, aside from his unique voice, is that he occupied several positions. He was at once a writer, an academic, and public intellectual, and he connected with different audiences in both Arabic and English. Moreover, he never attempted to cultivate followers or to curate his legacy. His primary audience was his inner self, which he critically interrogated while maintaining a genuine excitement about life. His love of swimming in the open sea, which is amazing because Adonis started with the waves, for those who speak Arabic, on the shores of Beirut. Every morning, as the sun rose, Halim would went and swim on the beach right outside AUB while he lived there. For him, many of his novels reflect the moments and the experiences he felt while swimming. His love of swimming in the open sea inspired poetic prose, and his regular walks along hillsides and riverbanks yielded beautiful stones and handsome driftwood that adorned his home. His infectious laugh, witty humor, and charismatic dabki dancing style lit up many an evening gatherings. Several decades of slides and pictures of the people and the nature he lovingly photographed constitute, along with his books, essays, and letters, a treasured archive. Most of all, his humbleness, principled stances, and optimism communicated an enduring sense of purpose to all those who had the fortune to know him, including many of his relatives and his family here. I won't mention their names one by one, but we are thankful that you are joining us today for this event. Now I'm going to get to the part not of celebrating his life, but of building on his legacy. So I would like to, and this will only take about 1 minute, inform you that the family has moved to establish the Halim and Hayat Barakat Scholarship in the amount of it's an endowment in the amount of $100,000. We believe that this is the most effective and appropriate way to build on their precious legacy, as well as to recognize their kindness and generosity. An endowment, here by that we mean a scholarship that will exist in perpetuity, and it'll be remembered year after year as it's announced and awarded. The endowment is to be located at Birzeit University in Palestine. Not only did Palestinians have a special place in Halim and Hayat's heart, but the tuition there is so small that actually an endowment is practical to do. And to do it at Georgetown, which we would have loved to do, would have cost $1 million to $1.5 million. And I'm not sure we'll be able to raise that money, but we are very much hoping to raise this $100,000. And we went through a kind of a silent fundraising campaign before this event to let you know that it's possible. And we have raised $47,000 so far. We're hoping that any of you who are interested, you'll find in the back a link to contribute to that scholarship fund to reach the $100,000 goal. And I'm also glad to say that Birzeit University, which needs no introduction as it is the first and most important Palestinian university, is also the only one with a 501c, so it'll be tax deductible. I want to thank the members of the family who already contributed from the Barakats and the Dumanis. Also, the Jerusalem Fund contributed $5,000. Dr. Subhil Eid contributed money as well. We have an anonymous donor, as well as Dr. John Makhul, who also contributed money to this event. And I'm hoping all of you will consider doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Bishara. And once again, I also want to thank Coco Tate and Vicky Velasic and Tala Hamdan, who helped make this event possible. Our final speaker is Jihad Abu Salim, Executive Director of the Jerusalem Fund, as well, the Jerusalem Fund for Education and Community Development and its education program, the Palestine Center. Jihad is the co-editor of Light in Gaza, Writings Born of Fire, published by Haymarket in 2022. Welcome, Jihad.
Thank you, Fida, and thanks everyone for being here today. My remarks will be short. Right. So I joined the Jerusalem Fund for Education and Community Development and its educational program, the Palestine Center, in March of this year. And for me personally, as a Palestinian who left Gaza a decade ago, leading an organization with the words Jerusalem and Palestine in a place like Washington, D.C. is no small deal. In Gaza, which I'm sure is on many people's minds today, living under Israel's blockade, people there, the 2 million Palestinians there, feel an acute sense of isolation and loneliness and abandonment. They yearn for freedom, yet often the world turns a blind eye to their demands and aspirations. And this sentiment isn't exclusive to Gaza, but resonates throughout Palestine and other parts of the world where oppressed populations live and strive for liberation and emancipation. So for many Palestinians, including myself, being in this city, a place that can be unwelcoming and even hostile to our dreams and aspirations, can be challenging. This city not only overlooks our hopes, but also houses power centers that work against our aspirations and dreams. That said, there are also amazing people and organizations here too. Yet, institutions like the Jerusalem Fund and Palestine Center offer hope and provide a glimpse of hope in this challenging reality that Palestinians face. At the Jerusalem Fund, we provide a platform for Palestinian narrative in an otherwise hostile place, as I said. Today, as my colleagues and I champion the Palestinian voice here in Washington, D.C., we extend our deepest gratitude to Halim Barakat and to the intellectuals and leaders who braved the barriers, the political and legal barriers that stood in the way of telling the Palestinian story in this town and have prevented us from sharing our accounts and having our narrative heard. Halim Barakat's dedication and commitment to liberation and contributions to our institutions ensure that we today have dedicated spaces to voice our narratives and to challenge the forces trying to silence our very existence. Today, as we honor Halim Barakat's legacy, but every day, through our efforts, we honor and uphold the ideals he stood for. Recognizing Halim isn't just a one-time act, but an ongoing commitment. So thank you so much for joining us here today, and thank you for playing a part in preserving and amplifying the intellectual and political legacies that Halim Barakat nurtured. Thank you for being with us, and we hope to see you soon as part of the spaces that Halim helped build and maintain. Thank you so much.